Hello and welcome to Cybeats Powerhouse Perspectives. My name is Chris Blask. I'm the Vice President of Strategy at Cybeats. This is Sam Clemens. We're in just off Shark Key in Key West. With us today is Shane Coughlan of the OpenChain project, Linux Foundation. Shane, thank you very much for your time. Where in the world are you and what's up?
It's my pleasure to be here, Chris. So I'm in Japan, so I'm quite a distance away from you. What is up at the moment is that we are both at 6 a.m. here, so it's a nice and early start. And we're, of course, in the middle of a very busy policy year as we address things like how we get the supply chain working better and more transparently. So I think it's a pretty good time for you and I to talk.
Things are moving along, right? So as we discussed before this, there's, in this little thing we do, we try to look back, look where we are right now and try to, feel where the future is going. So Anthony, if you would pop up that first question, because with your background in open source and policy and all these, the legal aspects of it, you're right in the zone that I keep basically nagging people about, right? I think in the end, smart contracts get between entities with attestation systems and yes, software bill of materials, but also carbon attestations and things just happen. And you've been at this a long time.
Yeah.
Right. And, I just came from the oldest computer company in the world who just now, or just in the last year and a half or so, did their first open source. How has this changed? Is it pervasive or?
Things have changed dramatically. And I think if I was to pick up one overarching image for it, I'd say we're in the analog to digital moment. A lot of the policy work, a lot of the process work previously was quite literally written down somewhere. And the penetration of policies, the penetration of process management tended to be confined partially due to the sheer restrictions of how information was shared. Now, of course, we're in a situation where every engineer in any part of a multinational should be able to click and check what's our policy in this domain, what's our process in this domain. We're not quite there yet. We're somewhere in the middle of from paperwork to universal access. But I think where we are is that the acceptance of open systems is more or less a given. Now, the deployment and the management of open systems, not so much. But the acceptance, I think, has been overcome. And I would say that's a marked difference to 20, 25 years ago, where people didn't really accept that open was better. They would rather think that the more we lock this down, the smaller the grouping, the higher the domain knowledge, the more efficient and effective we'll be, as opposed to the concept of how do we have an open system which can take on board new information, it can evolve, and so on and so forth. So acceptance has changed, implementation is improving. Where we end up, to be determined, but hopefully with the concept that open systems everywhere implemented will increase efficiency and effectiveness.
So we're here now, right? And, we're at this point where we have software bill of materials, consuming a lot of headlines. It's what I'm spending almost all my time on when I'm not messing with the boats. And it's the question of IP control are on everybody's mind, right? And it's, how do I give this information to whom, and how do I know what's handled and so forth? Paul Rosenzweig was on here this show. We don't know what to call this thing yet. This thing we do, where parties are there, intentionally, and those contracts. I look at legal text and I see code. If this, then that, therefore thus, right? And my understanding of smart contracts, and I know the Linux Foundation has smart contract projects, and everybody's working on these things. Where are we now? With the Anthony question number 2, if you can. So LFE, that's right. Shuli Goodman, the late, the great Shuli Goodman, the not late Shuli Goodman, who was our first guest on this thing we do. The Linux Foundation Energy Project, I love. Shuli and that team is trying to decarbonize the entire world with open source.
Right.
Which, if you don't know what open source means, maybe a head nod. But it's obvious. We need to have openness in all the communications if we're going to manage the output of industrial production for purposes like, saving the climate of the earth. So at the point we're at right now, and everybody's thinking about supply chain and Shuli and other people are looking at these other attestation complex systems that are going to require a lot of policy. This period we're in right now, this year, next year, what's your assessment? What do you think we're
able
to do?
I need a multi-part answer on this and beg your forgiveness. And
my questions are ridiculously long. Go.
Well, I think, first of all, we can take an example from the automotive industry, and let's look at the Toyota system. And the concept of the Toyota system is continual improvement. But one of the key aspects of it is that any party in the Toyota production system can call a halt if they see a problem or a significant inefficiency. So your line worker can literally press a button and stop the line. Now, that type of enablement and power has extremely good results when applied. So, for instance, Toyota is the world's largest car maker. Just 3 days ago, when they had a supply chain disruption in Japan alone, they failed to make 14,000 vehicles in that single day. So the efficiency, the activity is very high. And that's really an example of an implementation of a system with a lot of open access. And it reflects something that I think the rest of us are only getting our head around now. If it takes us 200,000 people to make a product or to get a solution working or to run an infrastructure, those 200,000 people are the stakeholders in success. And previously, we would sort of say, those are my workers. And this group of us, 100 guys who are middle-aged and golfing, we're the ones who determine how the system works. And obviously, if you're a middle-aged golfer, you're not really aware of what's happening on the production line. And that's the differentiation between a closed access and an open access system in a crayon drawing. So I think that we're all becoming aware now that having a system where the stakeholders can respond, having a system where you understand that your breakpoints in terms of personnel reach into the thousands or tens of thousands of people and the millions of actions, you need everyone working together. Acknowledging that is becoming mainstream. Implementing that, we're stuck right in the middle of it. And there's multiple ways to do it, of course. I mentioned the analog to digital transition, and you can use digital systems to do it. You can go really towards the future of automation and have things like a smart contract, which needn't, of course, be blockchain. As you said, Chris, it's more like if, else, then, and it can be implemented anywhere. We're on our way. And looking at the energy industry in particular, as Shuli must have said, no doubt, the interesting thing is the sheer scale of it. People use energy every day, but they don't often realize how big the energy cycle is, from pulling stuff out of the ground to getting your power to your socket. And managing that partly is one of the keys to doing things like dealing with the carbon footprint. We're wasting energy every day. We waste everything every day. Getting water to a house wastes a certain percentage of that water before it gets to you. It's precisely the same with energy. So the more effective that supply chain, the more effective that production is, the better we get at not just delivering something, but at reducing waste. In energy, we're looking at reducing carbon footprints, and we're looking at having the ability to pivot, to say now we have the maturity in this geographic zone to switch 20% of the buildings to solar. Or in Japan, a real example, 29% of new houses built in Japan in 2019 were solar. Right, so you're looking at a situation where you can say, well, we've had so many new houses built in this sector. We now know we can offload grid to these houses when they sell their energy in the daytime, and we put up a backup battery system over here, and we run it at night, and we're no longer running the fossil fuel energy into that grid section. That type of knowledge is really useful, and that's where Shuli's kind of going, the efficiency of that. And of course, just as I mentioned, with the automotive example, we're dealing with massive complexity, many stakeholders and millions of decisions. And it's inherently got to be an open access decision process. It's got to be transparent and auditable so it can be improved by the stakeholders. And I think open source plays a part in that. Open source, software is just a tool, it's a hammer. But it's one of the tools you need in your back pocket to accomplish things like really efficient, effective systems. And if you're dealing with openness and transparency and the ability to evolve, open source is a very useful hammer in the software domain, because that's precisely what it allows. And it allows your colleagues in China to make advances on the tech front and you to put them in play in Japan and vice versa. So yeah, people are becoming aware of it. We're in the middle of implementation. But the gap between potential and realization is always a very large bridge to cross. And I'd say we're walking across the bridge, but there's no reason to be overconfident that we're going to cross the bridge most effectively or that we're going to do it in a near horizon. I'm cautiously optimistic that we're on the right track, and I'm certainly very optimistic that the people spearheading innovation in policy and processes and in technology are increasingly the people who get it, that we need to go in this direction.
Right. And you touched on my favorite part, profitability. And not because I personally, love money, and it's a lovely thing. Don't get me wrong, but I found if you want to achieve security goals, what you need to do is find some way that the people who need to spend the budget make more money, because then they'll just do it. Right. And I've seen quantums in my life where this has changed. And I'm thinking of three, things that happened over my career. Like 30 years ago, working at General Electric, we did video conferencing. Right. Now watch for the Jack Walsh days, where his number 2 came through and sat in person with Jack in Schenectady and everybody on the same thing that you can't do flying around even then, and interviewed people one after another. And one young guy, local, South Carolina guy who ran a machine making these big rings, really nervous, but him and his coworkers put together this big presentation. And, the well-weighted process change to get more efficiency. And he listened, carefully, talked to Jack and said, I was running the video conference center at the time, so I got to watch this. We're doing that in all our plants worldwide now. And GE, as we know, with the Welch days, was the underdog. We're competing, ironically, with Mitsubishi for we made the first 300,000 horsepower gas turbine engine and beat Mitsubishi for our first sale to Tokyo Electric Power Company, because GE had turned from this, wallowing, creature to adopting different tactics that were emergent. And as and something that had to do with transparency, the ability for the executives to talk directly to the people on the line who were doing the work and get the feedback now, right? And twice, not just twice as often, but an order of magnitude more often. About 15 years ago, at a Usenix conference in Toronto, open source conference, the first time I saw somebody from a large traditional computer company, I won't mention, who was driving a hallway full of people mad by saying open source is great as long as it's entirely proprietary at all times. And then take us up to the near present, Unisys, Peter Altabeth, and Eric Hutto, the lead executives, open sourced the DBOM code through the Linux Foundation, December 2020. First time in 150 years.
Right.
And that's, the conversations lead up to that. Why are we doing this? We're giving it away. It's like, no, we need to build a global infrastructure because no company's big enough. So we're coming down this path. And you illustrated this really, really well. And Anthony, if you would throw that third question, are we moving into a transparent future? Policy, the agreements where it's not, I can't tell, nobody knows. It's like, no, not in business and ultimately in everyday life, you can say, I do know. Here's the policy of my local government, municipal government, the business contracts, if I need to know 3 steps down the supply chain, I can see it. The policy is automated. Or am I Pollyanna, looking to a bright future that's not that close? What do you think?
Yeah. I think we're in an area where the domain experts, by and large, have always advocated transparent policy, because if a policy can't be known, it's not going to work. And I'll pull back here to the security domain. So I'm a political scientist, and about 20 years ago, I was focused on policy around both nuclear weapons and net-centric warfare. And what was interesting about dealing with net-centric warfare in the computer domain from the national policy perspective was that people doing security were very clear. First of all, you need to know exactly what your policy is, what your trigger points are. Second of all, you need to be aware that whatever you do, for instance, your security will be breached and you need more policy and processes for that day. And then when it came to tools and things like software, it really should be really auditable and improvable. So at that time, the discourse wasn't full on open source, but effectively open source falls into that, and it's a perfect fit. And when you look at other policy domains like, say, export control, or you're just looking at high reliability and regulation, the domain experts, I think, are always saying policy really needs to be transparent, it needs to be fully available, and so on. Now, I think at a different level, let's say in politics, the political people, or in a civil service, aspects of a civil service, in a business, aspects of administration, these particular subsets of each operational entity have had a difficulty in, let's say, fully embracing that policy should be transparent or very easily accessible. They've had some difficulties in accepting things like the software, including the software in your company. Some of it will have value as being proprietary, but a lot of it won't, because it's just foundational stuff. It's like the way the air conditioner near me is running on Linux, so is my TV. They both need it. So they can't go to market without it, but the business value of Linux to them is zero. The collaborative value of both being able to use Linux is high. So that being open source makes sense. Getting that grokked and understood in some areas of companies or governments takes a while. But I think we are way further down that journey than we were 20 years ago. And I do think in the future, all policy will be transparent, simply because the amount of people who think that having policy that's opaque is a good thing is dropping dramatically in the active job market. And when you look at the young people coming up, and this is the sad thing, they're half my age or less, you're looking at these young people, and they're essentially digital natives who I think are surprised when you put a block on something like transparency and policy, or put a limit on being able to contribute to process evolution. They're like, what? So yeah, I think that everything will be transparent. We're getting there. And right now, a lot of the heavy lifting is being done to take the legacy stuff and either open it up or at least shine a light on it, clear it up, and make sure you can audit it.
Yes, we've been on this path for so long, right? And there's so many parts of this. I'm seeing in real time right now. The issues of the talking to you today is particularly timely because the license of open source code inside proprietary code is a big issue at work these days. Because we're at that point in the SPOM world where the leaders, the leading software providers are thinking this through and saying, look, well, we actually license. Licensing is big. I actually need to know because there's copyright, copyleft, and you're the expert on this. If you don't have that visibility, how exactly are you making or using the products?
Right.
And so everybody's just thinking through that right now, right? And it's these inflection points, where you see the values, and again, the economic value, when the companies and the organizations start saying, oh, it's way more efficient. Not just I can respond to security better, but I'm not spending all the time. Auditing as a process,
right,
is becoming automated. IP control is known because you've built it into the systems. And I think this inflects in interesting ways. It apply globally to all sorts of things. And I love the Linux Foundation in the supply chain because it's really just the SBOM conversation right now. But it's so much more than that. And what Shuli's doing with Linux Foundation Energy and folks like yourself, bringing all this expertise to these stakeholders, executive stakeholders and boards as they're working through this, I think just it speeds it all up. So
I have a note on that, and I think it's related to the fact that we need to know why we're doing something. So for instance, you don't do security just because security is a good idea. There's an actual outcome you're looking for. And of course, when you're in the security domain and looking to implement, your question isn't how do I have perfect security? It's what are we trying to accomplish with our security aim here? And how do we get as close to that as possible with the knowledge, of course, that there will be interruptions and you mitigate for that. So, you don't do security to do security. You do security for uptime. So your customers can continue to process their information or something else. And it's the same, I think, with license compliance. You're not doing compliance because compliance is a good idea. You're doing compliance because you have an outcome you're looking for. And a good example in the supply chain with open source license compliance is that the last thing you want is to be company number 26, getting close to product to market, and suddenly you're like, we can't actually ship this. And then you go back through 25 companies to find out who made a mess and how to fix it. So something like a software bill of materials is a really useful tool to get some of this done quickly, whether it's license compliance or a security hiccup. If you find a package with a problem and your supply chain is using something like an SBOM, you can really go through that a lot more quickly than before. And that is going to save you time. It's going to save you money. So I always attach these things to the very practical side. You don't want security because security is a good idea. You want security because it's giving you an outcome. License compliance is going to give you an outcome, usually saving time and money, and so on and so forth. And once you hang it on those facts, I think you can get more people aligned behind the process management and actually leaning into it. Perhaps this is one unfortunate thing I think both security experts and lawyers suffer from. There's a joke I read once that said that a lawyer's main aim in your company is to get everyone to put their palms up on the table and not do anything.
That's right.
Exactly. And of course, that's not what the lawyer's trying to do. Their job is to be the advocate for risk. Their job is to reduce risk for the company. And your job is to get product to market, so you're naturally going to lock horns. And if you've got a great relationship, you'll both know where the middle point is, and you'll aim for that as fast as possible. Security experts, by the same token, are going to look at everything you're doing and they'll be like, ooh. But that's also not because they want you to stop you going to market. It's because they want to help get you there and keep you there. And their job is to be the advocate for that type of risk.
Well, and that's a great note to end on, because it is that, in anybody who's worked in any sort of corporate world knows that, the transparency of the conflict between those, roles and responsibilities, those stakeholders, and define your effectiveness and efficiency and your profitability and your competitiveness. Can you say, to another person, and you have policies about how you speak to them and so forth. So that's defines more than the expertise, more than anything else, defines the success of the company. And that drives the adoption of these things.
And if you're a company that I'd put down on the wisdom through long suffering, a company gets to a point where it's like, no, they're not going to let the lawyer be the blocking point on a product, but they're also not going to let the product team be a blocking point on the law. They're going to have another part of the company which looks at both sides. It's like, you both followed processes. Now we know that this is the area we've got, and we're going to go high or low risk in there with our eyes wide open for these reasons. And I think that, as you said, if people know their jobs, if you don't have blocking points in the wrong place, you can do the best we can do at the time and evolve from there. And that's all you can ask for. You can never ask for perfection. What you can ask for is the best we can do right now and the ability to continually improve over time.
Well, we're living in a world where I had a conversation with this really smart guy in Japan today, who shared a story before we started recording this about, higher profitability large corporations where line workers can stop everything, because it's better to give them the button because you'll just save money. And that, I think, is the winning ticket, in open source. Those of us been behind it all along have been looking for and advocating. So I want to thank you for your time, Shane. This has been awesome. I could do it all day long. Next, when the world turns normal again, I get to Japan and we're definitely hanging out. And if you make it to the Florida Keys, we'll use green power with our systems we make here on the water to enjoy some sunsets and fresh fish.
Sounds good. Thanks very much, Chris. Really appreciated it.
Thank you. And thanks everyone out there. Cheers.